afternoon, everybody. You're very welcome to today's webinar as part of the Dublin Lean Network. So, as you've seen from your invitation, today's topic is moving from being stuck to making a stick, embedding a sustainable excellence culture. So I just want to introduce myself. My name is Ciaran Crosbie. I'm Innovation and Learning Lead for Alexion Biopharmaceuticals, and we're a global biopharma company with a major manufacturing site based in Dublin, in Blanchardstown. And as my secondary part of my role, or as part of my industry role, I'm involved in the Dublin Lean Network. Dublin Lean Network is one of the lean networks as a part of Lean Business Ireland. So it's a mechanism for sharing knowledge and sharing best practices and trying to bring like-minded professionals together to discuss all things continuous improvement. So I would encourage you to visit the Lean Business Ireland website to register your interest and to register your interest for discussions as part of the Dublin Lean Network. It is one of 9 regional networks, and as we are in the virtual world at the moment, we are offering virtual seminars, virtual webinars. So you can join a webinar from any of the Lean networks. You can review webinars that have happened in the past. So it's a great source of learning, and hopefully over the year we'll build into a network of professionals across all sectors of industry, whether that is manufacturing, financial sector, services sector, medical device, pharma. We're trying to cover all angles. So today I'm delighted to be joined by Nuala O'Hagan. Nuala O'Hagan's continuous improvement lead in Rabobank, to give us her perspectives. And Nuala is a highly engaged leader and coach with considerable experience in both financial services and manufacturing sectors. She's interested in how people work and learn. And within Rabobank, she designs, implements, and supports sustainable ways of working that maximize both business results and personal development. With deep experience in implementing sustainable continuous improvement approaches, she is also focused on ensuring that complementary work systems such as learning and development are continuously improved to drive better outcomes. She has deep experience in engaging and coaching staff at all levels to effect cultural shift, and is a high energy and effective communicator, trainer, and mentor. She is a qualified workplace coach and is currently studying for a master's in organizational psychology and behavior in DCU. So during Nuala's chat, if you have questions, please put them into the chat. We'll try and address as many as we can at the end of the call. And without further ado, I'll hand you over to Nuala.
Okay, thank you very much. Hello all. Welcome to yet another Zoom call. I'm sure you guys have been on more Zoom calls than you care to think about. I see some familiar faces out there, which is lovely. A couple of things before I start. We are all working remotely. There's an outside chance I may have a kid invasion at some point. They've been bribed to not come in for this hour, but you know, if they do, we'll just roll with it. And I'm hoping the tech behaves itself here. There's nothing high tech, but you know yourself, the best things can trip us up. So what I'm going to do is just share a couple of slides. You'll be glad to know I have very few slides. I'm not a big fan of big slide decks. They're more as sort of an aid to thinking about what we're doing. So let's see if we can get this working. Fingers crossed. Okay, if someone could give me a thumbs up or a nod if they can see the slides, we're good. Okay, so thank you for inviting me to come here today. I'm very happy to share a little bit about our story. I'm a huge advocate of sharing networks because we're all figuring out the same things. We're all working on the same problems. So more than happy to be here. In Rabobank in Dublin, we've been on an improvement journey for around 10 years, and there just isn't the scope to go through it all here. So what we're going to try and do is focus in on this idea of plateauing and getting out of that plateau and looking at the cultural side of things. I am high energy. I do tend to talk very fast, but I'll try. I have a post-it beside me saying slow down, so I will try to keep the pace down. I can see Noel smiling, and Noel and me could have a competition for who talks the fastest, I reckon. But anyway, okay. And for you guys, we are going to be polling you as we go. We'd like to get a sense of how some of these things resonate with you. So we're going to do some polling, and actually we're going to kick off with a poll before we go any further. We'd love to get a sense of where you work, what kind of industry you're in. So you should see a wee poll coming up on your screen in a minute or two, just to get a sense of industry sector. So if you can answer that, and while you're doing that, I'll tell you a bit about Rabobank. So I'm actually going to answer it myself. There we go. So let's have a look at Rabobank. So some of you will have heard of Rabobank, some of you may not. We are a Dutch bank. And in the Netherlands, we're one of the top 3 banks. It's like an AIB, if you like. Within the Netherlands, the focus is mainly on retail banking, which is the kinds of banking that you and I do ourselves, mortgages and car loans and so on. Outside the Netherlands, the focus is on wholesale banking, which is lending to large corporates. And it's only in the food and agricultural sector. So that's the niche that Rabobank works in. We have a branch, a Rabobank International in Dublin. We've got about 120 people. And of those 120, about 80 work in a service centre. So what we do, it's a familiar concept. We provide sort of middle and back office services to branches of Rabobank in Europe. Most of our improvement journey has been centred on that service centre, so that'll be the focus of what we look at today. And when those poll results pop up, we'll have a look to see what kind of spread we have. Here we are. Okay, so we've got a huge spread. We've got a couple in financial services, pharma, med tech, engineering, tech. Okay, so we've got quite a lot of people from kind of tech sectors, but we also have public and consultancy. Okay, that's cool. Later on, when we look at questions and answers, we might look at this idea of, how does improvement turn up in different industries? Is it the same or is it different? All right, so let's look a little bit on our journey. What I want to do is kind of gallop through the first phase of our journey and then start to focus on this idea of getting stuck, because I think that's maybe the interesting point. So if I can get my slides to work. Here are the service centre. This is a photo taken clearly pre-COVID. This is us last year. And somebody took it at an angle, and I don't like straightening it out because I think it's quite cute that this photo is at an angle. So we have been using Lean in our service centre since about 2011. And when we were in 2011, we had a service centre. We were providing, services out, but we weren't great, to be honest with you. The quality wasn't amazing. The service wasn't amazing. Some of our internal customers, who were the branches, weren't particularly happy with us, and we knew we had to change something. So that was the prompt to start a Lean journey. And a lot of companies will have something like that that prompts them. So we did what a lot of people do. We got some consultant help internally and externally, and we built a local continuous improvement team in Dublin, started to build some capability. And then we set off and did all the sorts of familiar things that lots of you are probably very familiar with. We trained everybody in Lean basics. Lean was the main philosophy we used. And then we started work on building all of that lovely bottom-up culture. We put in place what we call the daily stand-up meetings. You might call them huddle meetings or tier meetings. We put in place the visual management. We started to encourage people to work on bottom-up improvements. We worked on medium-sized improvements, Kaizens, and we trained some green belts. We had all of those kind of activities working along. We put a lot of emphasis on communicating it, recognizing success, all those good feedback loops. And we were quite successful. Our quality improved, our service improved, customers were happy with us. It's so far so common. It's a recognizable story. And over the next few years, we were able to grow. Between our improvement efforts and some automation work we did, we were able to take on more and more work for branches without actually increasing our headcount. So obviously the financial people love this. We can literally do more with the same. For us, it was never about doing more with less. It was doing more with the same. So we grew, and gradually, as we got better at it, we started to get recognition. Dublin are quite good at this work that they're doing now, and we like the way they're doing this improvement stuff. I think at this point, it's useful to note as well that Rabobank has, 40,000 people worldwide, but there is no single standard to how they implement continuous improvement. And this is a huge contrast to some other companies who will, devise one way they want to do it. They'll call it the Kerry production system or whatever, and they'll roll it out in an identical way everywhere. That is not how Rabobank does anything. It's just not the culture. So continuous improvement has mushroomed and evolved in different ways in different parts of the world. So our version is the Dublin version, if you like, and maybe that's one of the secrets to how we've been able to do things, but we can pick that up later. So anyway, we were doing great work, and we got to around about 2016, and things were fairly good. And a few things happened in 2016 for us. So we had some changes in our management team, and our head office kicked off a review of what we were doing. So some of you will work in large foreign companies, and you'll know that if you're a site in Ireland from a foreign-owned company, you always feel like you're under scrutiny because we're an expensive place to run a business. There's always that idea that they might do a review and say, oh, you're very expensive, we'll send the work elsewhere. And in 2016, this happened. Our head office set off a review to compare how we were doing some work to a relatively comparable site in the Netherlands. We'd always lived with this kind of potential threat, which we'd used as a way to push ourselves forward. But now it was a real threat, and we knew we needed to get better again. We needed to stay ahead of the game again. And we had a sense that we might need to do something different this time. And in 2016 as well, we realized we were feeling a bit stuck. So this is where the stuck came from the title. We had lots of good things in place, but we had a lot of reliance on a few key people. Those people who, I can see Noel nodding, those people who are your light bulb people, they're natural leaders and some actual leaders, and you kind of worry if you took them out of the picture, would it stay? We had pockets of really good work, pockets of really good practice, but it was uneven. You know, some teams weren't doing this great. And, you know, we had a sense that we had lots of pieces, but it wasn't all really connected. And the idea of the metaphor of a jigsaw comes to me, that you have all of these pieces and you're kind of working on them, but it didn't really feel cohesive. We realized we were stuck, a bit like Pooh Bear. Very relevant for me with small children who listen to stories at the moment. And I think between that realization and these kind of burning platforms coming from, you know, having head office looking at us, we said, okay, we're going to have to do something differently here. And we become aware of Shingo. And we start to look more closely at Shingo and says, what is this? And could this offer us a way out of our stuckness, a way out of our plateau, if you like? And luckily enough for us, we had some, you know, some local visionary leadership who came with us and said, yeah, you know, this could be something we can do. So before I go into telling you about what we do with Shingo, I'm interested to see if anybody else recognizes that idea of stuck. So we're going to throw out a wee poll to you again. That idea that you feel like you've sort of plateaued. Have you hit a roadblock? Do you feel stuck? I'll be interested to see, because some people I talk to have reckoned they've hit this too. So while you're answering that, I'll tell you a little bit about what we did to get past that stuck. So if you want to use Shingo, you have to figure out what it's about. In order to do that, you need help. So typically what people do is they get some consultants in who are deeply experienced in Shingo to help them. And this is what we did. So we brought in SA Partners, a consultancy, to help us. And the partners in the name is actually fair. They really do partner with you. And we kicked off on our Shingo journey. So for those of you who don't know what Shingo is, if I get my slides to work, it's a bit hard to describe it in 30 seconds, but essentially it's a model and a set of principles that, if followed, should help you achieve a sustainable form of excellence. It puts a huge focus on cultural behaviours. You'll see it in the middle of the model there. And it very much thinks and gets you to think in terms of systems of work, that system is not an IT system. It's, you know, a series of parts that connect together to deliver a whole. So it's forcing you to think in a sort of a system, a cyclical way, and to think very hard and very deliberately about behaviours and culture and how they drive sustainable improvements, if you like. So we kicked off our Shingo journey. SA Partners came in, and the first thing you do is you do a workshop to understand what Shingo is and to start to baseline yourself against it. And we involved everyone in our management layers in that workshop. We're quite small, so we could do that. But it was a crucial step because it kind of leveled us out, if you like. We were all learning together. It gave us all a new horizon to go for, so we could see a way out of the stuck. And it forced us to go and see what things were really like on the ground. So we had to go out to Gemba. Some of you know this word. Go out to where the work is done and talk to the real people. And the real people told us a story that did not always match the management narrative. And that really challenged, I can still see the room, that really challenged the management. You know, it challenged their view of how things were going on. And we began to see that there were loads and loads of areas where we could improve. And I think what Shingo helped us with was seeing where we could head with them. It gave us like a horizon to head towards. So what we did then was we started work on some of those areas. So we picked a couple of areas where we felt we were falling quite short, and we put work streams in place. And we asked members of our leadership team to lead those work streams. I wasn't in charge of any of this, and that was a bit new. And we looked for volunteers from our staff to work on those work streams, and there was massive take up. I did a count at the time, and we had 47% of all of our staff involved in these work streams to make things better. And that tells you a bit about the level of engagement and enthusiasm. And it was rather than trying to persuade people by talking to them, they just rolled up and mucked in, if you like. We did some work to improve things that we already had, like visual management and strategy deployment. But we also started working on things we'd never really touched before, like behaviours. And we'll go back to behaviours because it's absolutely key to this idea of a culture. So we got a lot of improvements quite quickly. And we built a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of momentum from doing that. And then we were able to start turning our attention to that jigsaw, if you like, and saying, right, okay, so we've got some of these things better. Now let's have a look at this jigsaw. Do we have all the pieces that we need? And we built and drew what we refer to very proudly as our continuous improvement system. And this, if you can see, is a really, really simplified image of that system. And drawing this up was huge. So I'll very quickly talk you through the basics of it. The concept is simple, but then it's really what it gave us that I think is interesting. So any sensible business should set a strategy, and that should be their sort of their go-to for everything you do. So we have a strategy, we drive out objectives and metrics from that, like any other business. And then we go off and we deliver our service. And for us, that's banking services. And what we do is we use those tools of standard meetings and visual management to manage. So that's how we understand how well we're doing. Are we winning or are we losing? What do we need to do to manage today and to create tomorrow, as our consultants would say to us. So it's how we manage our business. And then what we built in, which we hadn't had before, were triggers for action. So depending on how you're doing, you might need to kick into action. You might need to fix a problem, or you might have spotted something that isn't wrong, but that could be improved. And we built a really well-defined set of triggers to kick into action. And then the actions, you know, improvements and problem solving, they're all those lovely tools that lots of us use, all of your Kaizens and your A3s and your all of the things that you might use, your small improvements. The point for us was that you use those in response to how you're doing as a business. You don't just do them if you have a light bulb moment about something slightly random that isn't aligned. And once you work on those things, you make your improvements, you fix your problems, clearly you come up with solutions, and you'll have to go through some form of change governance depending on how you are to make sure that they're okay, settle them in, and off it goes again. And you'll see we have customers in the middle, because clearly we're doing this for customers, and we work extraordinarily closely with ours. They work hand in hand. We see it as a partnership, actually. So we're in constant contact. They provide a lot of the triggers to us. It's not even waiting until a metric turns. You know, they're giving us feedback. We're checking with them all the time. So they're central to this. And in a way, that's really simple. But if you want that to work as a way of working, you're going to have some skills for people to use this. You're going to have metrics to make sure that you can measure what's actually happening. We discovered it has to be in people's objectives. It's amazing what happens, how you focus the mind when people have specific and smart objectives about looking for ways to improve. And really, you also need to start looking at this idea of behaviors and routines for your leaders, because you could go through this as a tick box exercise. Yeah, we're holding stand-ups. Yeah, we're working on improvements. Yeah, we're doing problem solving, but you might be doing a rubbish job of them. So you need to bring these behaviors and routines to light to check on how well we are doing these things, so that you're not just going through the motions. Drawing this up for us was an absolute game changer. It's my favorite thing to look at, because it just helped us see the whole, if you like. We could stand and look at it. We could talk to everybody at every level about it. And people started to see that improvement isn't something you do when you have spare time. It's how you do your work. It's how you understand your performance. It's how you deal with what happens. And we moved away from that idea that it's an add-on at the side, if you like. It drove a lot of improvements for us. We realized, for example, that we didn't have a standard approach to fixing small problems. So if a team misses a target, it goes red on a certain week. Sure, they were telling us they were doing root cause analysis, but they weren't all doing it the same way, and it wasn't always effective. So we spotted that by drawing this up and put in, you know, a little standard way of solving small problems. So by drawing this up, you see your gaps. But you can also start to have conversations with your leadership team going, if this is how we are doing our business, well, who owns this system? And the answer is eventually the leaders realize that they own the system. So if they own the system, not continuous improvement, should they form a view on how well it's working? Yes. And should they form that view themselves, or they should ask Nuala's opinion? And gradually they realize, well, they should form that view themselves. And you start this shift towards a sense of ownership for all of this with a leadership team. Because in so many companies, it seems to sit with the continuous improvement team. Oh, they'll look after that, and they know if it's working well, and we'll ask their opinion. And we were challenging ourselves to shift that, to the leadership saying, well, see, I can help us technically, but we should form a view if this is working well. So what we did is we built what I call leader standard work routines for leaders. Now, leader standard work, it's bandied around a lot. I'm not going to say we have it completely cracked yet, because we don't. But for our senior leaders, we worked very hard to help them form routines so that they could form a view on how well all of this was working, and that they could start to use a coaching approach to help develop people and to help improve how this was going. So you don't have to be an expert on the details to be able to coach. And that's what we began to realize. And we spent a long time with them, and gradually our leadership started to shift. And it's not easy going from a directive style of leadership to a coaching style. And I think a lot of you will know that yourselves or from helping others. This didn't happen overnight. We had to do lots of experimenting, but gradually you found that the leaders were able to form a view on how well things were going, and were able to then do some coaching to help improve that when they found it. And that really helped from a top-down perspective, if you like. At this stage, then, we also developed a series of ideal behaviours. And we've had a couple of goes at this over the last few years. We started with a set of 9 behaviours, but that was too many. We couldn't remember them. And a couple of years ago, we whittled it down to 4. And it's worth looking at what a behaviour means and the idea of a culture. My favourite quote around culture is, the culture is what happens when no one else is looking or the leader isn't there, you know? And when we sort of started to dissect this, we learned to look at behaviours quite differently. We realised they're not kind of fluffy things. Behaviours are things that are observable. They're the result of your actions that you do over and over. And we began to realise that these are actually something that can be quite deliberate, that you can practice, and then you can start to influence your culture through your actions. You may have come across that phrase, act your way into behaving differently. And that's what it is to me. You take actions which start to form habits, which start to become behaviours, and then those behaviours start to actually influence your culture. So rather than hoping you can shift your culture through words, you modify your culture through what everybody does over and over again. We did a lot of work to try and make these behaviours tangible. And again, I'm going to say we're not perfect here. It's very easy to write these things down. It's much harder to sort of say to teams, right, we've got to have a good look at these. We've got to translate them into things that are meaningful for our team. And then we're going to have to go and reflect on them in our weekly meetings. How are we doing against these? Which are we great at? What are we not so good at, and how do we improve? And I'm not going to say we have that perfect, but we have those habits in place where we're mindful of those behaviours. And what happens is they tend to support your system then, and they drive the kind of culture you want. We also realise this has to come from the top. So if leaders, if we've got a set of behaviours, leaders better be demonstrating them as well, and they better be open to feedback where they're not demonstrating them. And to their credit, our leadership team have been very humble and very open and very reflective themselves, which has really helped. So at this stage, maybe it's good to pause and have a look at this idea of improvement in different industries. So we had a look at all those sectors there, and people sort of say to me sometimes, do you see a difference between financial services and manufacturing? I used to work in manufacturing. And the answer is yes and no. The concepts are the same. The basics are the same. The practical implementation, I think, is a little different. It can be harder sometimes to measure a service, or it can certainly seem harder to measure a service than a widget. Waste is definitely harder to see when everyone's sitting behind a computer. It's a lot harder to see than when the packaging line has stopped because there's a blockage. And I used to be able to see that from my window in my old factory. I also think there's a cultural difference around the word standard. We might pick this up later on. I have this sense that if you work in a technical industry where safety and quality are absolutely paramount, you're cool with the idea of a standard because you have to have the standards to have the quality, to have the safety. If you work in an industry where you can't kill people, forgive me, like banking, I think the tension isn't just quite the same. The safety tension, the quality tension is maybe not quite the same. And I think maybe it leads to not quite as good a gelling of the idea of standards. People can feel like you're squishing their creativity. They are knowledge workers and they're really quite special, So I think you can have a challenge occasionally with that idea of a standard. So we could pick that up later maybe. So that's trying to give you a whistle stop and looking at the time of what we've done in the last few years. And that's all fine, but that's all activity. So what did we do? What did we get out of it? And the results are pretty cool. So the first thing is we won an award. I love that. That's a year and a quarter ago. We won Lean Business Ireland Award for Enterprise. That's when we're all used to be in a room, right? Remember that? Remember parties in rooms, with these things called drinks? So that was fantastic, but that was a nice recognition for us, but it really isn't what actually matters to us. What matters to us clearly is our business results. And as a service centre, it's all about how our customers are feeling about us and how our quality is. These are snapshots from a while ago, but the patterns have remained. We just went up and up to the point where we've been able to make our targets harder and harder and keep meeting them, if that makes sense. And it's been a pretty consistent pattern. And I suppose for us, one of the ultimate things that's happened is that we are growing. In a time of a pandemic and all things going on, we are in the middle of building a second service centre at the moment. So at the moment we have a service centre that services European branches. We're now building one where we're taking in work and we'll be supporting Asia and North America as well. We're just in startup phase, so it's manic, but we did our first transaction on the 19th of January. And this is huge. And the reason we have this is because of the work we've done. because we have built something that's good enough that the organization head office has faith in us, if you like, that we can do this. So I'm nearly done for those of you who can't follow my very fast poll. I guess we have to talk about this fella briefly. I'm a microbiologist originally, so this time last year, it was really cool reading about this cool virus, and then it became less cool, and now, like the rest of you, I'm quite fed up. What's the pandemic do for us? Well, like everybody else, it was a huge change. We're a bank. We had to go remote over a weekend. Friday, we were in the office. Monday, we were at home. That brings some challenges for banking, particularly around security concerns, but we managed to do it over a weekend. And in a nutshell, what happened was we relied on our CI system and we relied on our routines, and they got us through. So we already had all of those routines in place. We had the daily stand-up meetings. We had ways to solve problems. We just used them. It was just a different context. It wasn't BAU. It was, you know, an emergency. But I can remember the Monday morning, we all dialed into our stand-up meetings as normal. We changed the agenda to, right, what are we dealing with right here, right now? We broadened some of the groups for a week or two to bring more people onto a call. But basically, we used what we had. And all through last year, we used what we had. We had muscle memory, if you like. So we just used it. So we had the communication streams, we had the problem solving skills. And what really heartened me last year with everything going on is our people just kept plowing away on small improvements amongst everything else. So we track it and we recognize it. And over the course of last year, they implemented slightly fewer than the year before, but not much. They just kept coming up with the ideas and just kept putting them in. And that proves to me that you've built something here, you know, and they're getting really, really aggressive in their targets for this year. They feel they've got the hang of this remote thing now, you know, and they're going at it. So I guess the lesson for us is this works in BAU and it works in project mode and it works in kind of crisis mode as well. So where we're going next, I guess, to finish up here, is systems thinking. I love this little image of cogs because that's the way I think of it all now. When you start to look at a system, you start to see systems everywhere, and you start to see that all of these linear processes that you have need to be thought of in terms of systems, and you need to link them up so that they're cyclical and they can, you know, build in improvements, but also so they can interconnect properly. And that's really what we're doing. As we build the global service center, we're bringing all of the good stuff from the European Service Center. We're putting a focus on culture and behaviors front and center from the day you join, because it's so important. And we're also starting to turn our attention to, you know, building best practice task training, looking at how we onboard and induct people so that you don't learn this by osmosis, that this is deliberate in our way of working. We're working to look at how making sure we're hiring the right people, the talent development all the way through. These things all link, so we're working to work on those links. Another one for us is motivation. It'll be the same for all of you. How do you continue to motivate your staff in this protracted environment? So we're turning to psychology for answers there. We're looking at the design of jobs and looking at autonomy and how people can have a sense of meaning and purpose in their jobs and how we can impact their job design to achieve that best. And that's really where we're going ourselves. I'm interested in a final poll there. We might throw up a poll on where you see your focus at the moment, if it's on, you know, tools and techniques, or if it's on the people and culture. And neither is right or wrong. It's often just a function of where you are in your journey. For us, we've got a handle on the tools, and now it's around the psychology behind it and the motivation of people to get it going. So I think I'm going to take a breath at the stage because I haven't taken a breath since 1:05. Very briefly, just want to say thank you. And I always say this, I want to say thank you to the people I work with, because they are an amazing bunch of people. And I don't have any work to do unless they want to do this. Have to thank SA partners who've been brilliant partners with us in the last 4 years and really coached us through this, and they must have had to show a lot of patience with us, I think. And thank you to you. So I think, Ciaran, I'll throw back to you and we'll take it from there.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Nuala. That was excellent, as always. Very enlightening, and I think a real insight into a couple of things for me. One is, regardless of our industry, regardless of our sector, the issues are the same. The solutions are, are the same. Okay, the work may look different, and as you said, it might be more difficult to see waste, but the concepts, the theories are the same. One thing I just wanted to come back to, which I'm really, really interested in, is this concept of behaviors as part of that Shingo model, and behaviors driving that. We talked about, key behavioral indicators as part of that. So you measure, you can I'm really interested in hearing, how do you make that concept of behaviors, which can sometimes be quite, as you said, quite nebulous or hard to define, how do you make that tangible? How did you, and has that changed in any way as you've moved to the virtual world, how you measure those key behaviors?
It's a great question, and I'd say it's probably the hardest thing to wrap your head around, to translate it from nebulous. So what we try and do is we ask our staff to try and take these behavioral statements and come up with examples that are meaningful for their teams. And then we do ask them to track them. So I can give you an example of my own team. So our structure is changing, but we had a team of sort of service management and continuous improvement. Back when we had our original set of behaviors, we had one around kind of respect for people, and the way it translated is to, you know, if we commit to deadlines, we're going to commit to realistic deadlines, and then we're going to try and get to them. So what we did is we have an action tracker, like a lot of teams would have for the daily stand-ups, and we track the actions and the dates. And I don't know if any of you have whiteboards where, you know, if you miss a date, you just would erase it and put in the new date, and the date moves and the date moves. We're like, no, that date stays there, and you put a red dot in for every day you're overdue. And if you're really struggling, it starts to look like measles on the page. You know, and at the end of a week or a month, we look at those patterns. So if we're looking at behavior of deadlines, we'd say, how did we do? Yes. You know, and for our team, like a 1 month, we're like, that was brutal. We missed nearly everything. We had a conversation, and we recognized that we were A, over ambitious, B, not sizing the work, and C, so eager to please each other that we were putting in dates to make ourselves feel like we were pleasing people.
Yes.
So it led to a really good conversation. So what we did then built in was a challenge that we all agreed. So when we're agreeing to something as a gentle challenge, is that achievable? Is it the highest priority? And we just got into the habit of doing a bit of sizing priority. So that's one example. We have behaviors around robust solutions. So again, someone comes up with something that the challenge is that going to make it go away, or is it just going to dull the pain for a while? And you get into the habit of asking that question, and that's sort of, and you can measure that as well. You can look at how well the solutions have stuck. I would say it's not easy. I'd say there's people on the call who are way more experienced than me at this. It isn't easy, but it's worth it.
But I suppose the big thing for me is having those open and honest conversations. So when it comes to behaviors, and I think from my experience, we're good at defining what the behaviors we want to see are. So we have posters, and we can have it's translating into that tangible day-to-day conversation. So when I approach a whiteboard, or I approach a team, or I talk to someone on the shop floor, they can articulate and we can measure those tangible behaviors. I think that's a great example of looking back on maybe missed deadlines and seeing, well, what caused that? What was the behavior we were exhibiting there? Was it unrealistic timelines, unrealistic expectations? Was it, you know, willingness to please? So no, I think it's really good example of that.
It's easier, I might just say, it's easier with technical things like that. It's way harder with, you know, how people are dealing with each other, because we're Irish, and God, we don't like being direct, you know?
Yeah.
I work in a Dutch company. They're cool.
Right.
So sometimes we just channel the Dutch energy. They're a bit too direct. Yep. Dearly love them, but oh God. But I think we can channel a bit of that sometimes. We might even say we're going to go a bit Dutch here.
Right.
But the Irish, we're indirect. So you have to feel your way through those ones, I think, a bit.
Absolutely. Just, I'm going to dip in and out of the questions, and apologies to anyone if I don't get exactly to your question. But there was a few around that switch to virtual, and I think you touched on it at the end there. I suppose, I think a lot of us struggle with that, and some companies are in a sort of a hybrid mode where some people are on site and some people aren't. What was if you just ask you just to revisit that for a second, what would you say was your biggest challenge in that switch to remote in this world, in this sort of concepts? Did anything not work?
I think what we found was the emotional connection is missing. What used to be calling over to your desk, it's a very open plan area. Senior leaders sit amongst, you couldn't tell who the senior leaders are because they just sit amongst their staff. And the quick calling over, have you got 2 minutes conversation, becomes a 15-minute meeting. And then everyone's calendar is full. And 15-minute stand-ups, which used to run brilliantly, because everyone had their coffee and how was your weekend and all the rest of it. All of a sudden, the first time you're talking to them is 9:15 on a Monday morning, and you need 5 minutes to make connections. So we struggled and still struggle to get through content and allow space for people to connect. I think that was one part.
Sure.
And then a lot of people just were struggling with technology at the beginning as well. Like, we had just migrated to Microsoft Teams. Most of us didn't know our arse from our elbow, on Microsoft Teams. I was on a call today with someone a year in. She's still not quite great at sharing her screen, and I think those are some of the challenges. But the other thing for us is not being able to pick up on someone's mood. You know the way you can look across the room and I've got a question for Ciaran. Oh, he's got a big red head on him today. You know what? That can wait till tomorrow.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it is big challenge.
It's that stuff I think that honestly we struggle with. And now the sense of people working away at home, there's trust, people are clearly productive, but it's trying to find ways to make those emotional connections. And I suspect everybody is finding the same.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is a challenge. I think to your point, I think we you know, obviously we were all facing similar challenges. I think it's trying to recreate as best you can those sort of coffee moments or those just quick corridor conversations. It's very difficult, but you know, where you can, we should try and do that. Just want a couple of questions have come in around two things. One sort of two facets to the question. One was, what do you think drove the different approaches within Rabo to lean, and different different methodologies or different concepts? And then secondly, it's a fairly broad conversation, but it's around engaging your leadership. So if someone's in a position maybe where they have reluctance at a leadership level, either widespread or targeted reluctance, so particularly, you know, maybe a shift manager or team lead who's reluctant to adapt these tools, any tips on how to change their minds?
The first one's easier. The first one's easier. Why the disparate approach?
Yeah.
I think it comes from the history of Rabobank. So Rabobank is a very unusual bank. It doesn't have shareholders. It was set up as a cooperative about 130 years ago. So it was little tiny rural banks in villages in the Netherlands clubbed together to get effective at doing some things, okay? And that idea that everybody has a say and that everybody has an opinion and they're all equal is very Dutch. It's taught in Dutch schools, and it's at the core of Rabobank. This idea that a decision might be made on high and that everybody must conform, it's just not the Rabo way. You see it everywhere. You see it with everything. So I think the idea with continuous improvement, they, on the one hand, they don't want to give you a standard, but they very much encourage innovation and taking initiative, and they give you latitude. What that creates, of course, is a phenomenal amount of waste because there's knowledge pockets everywhere. So you have to work a lot harder to build them. The second question I'm avoiding because it's really hard. What do you do if your leaders aren't with you? We've been fortunate in Dublin that we've always had fairly influential people who have supported it, at least in principle. They get what it's trying to do. Not all of them have been prepared to roll up their sleeves. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
There have been some that are kind of like a benign grandfather.
Yes.
Not naming names. And they'll give you some money and they'll give you encouragement, but don't ask them to do it themselves.
Sure.
But I think what we've found as well is we haven't always had an entire leadership team on board, but if we've had at least one person, we try to sort of tap into that person. We try and get them out to see something else. Yes. Usually it's manufacturing, but hopefully our leadership can see past that to the concepts. And usually there's a massive burst of activity. I spent ages trying to persuade a couple of our leaders about this, and I was wasting my time. I got them out in a visit. They came back and told me stuff that I'd been telling them 2 years ago, and they thought it was a new discovery. So I just put them on. Happy days, they're there now. Yeah, so I think you won't persuade those people by words. You'll persuade them by bringing them out. And if one of them famously said to us, they saw it in action somewhere else. I get it now. Yeah. I get what that means to the people. And if they can also talk to people on the floor where you go, that resonates. It's more impactful coming from staff than it is coming from a CI person.
Yeah, absolutely. And just as a segue to that, obviously this Dublin Lean Network will be getting back to face-to-face at some point, when it's possible, because again, by bringing people to a shop floor or a service center or the process user level and showing them lean in action is just so powerful compared to no matter how long you talk to them. It really is. So hopefully, as soon as we can, we'll be facilitating those types of things. Just on a more maybe a more tangible or tactical note, there's a couple of questions around the management of the programs and the initiatives, the BELT programs. Did you use a single program or overarching software, or what was your approach to that in terms of tracking the capability building piece and then the outputs, both the projects and the outcomes and the results?
Nothing that sophisticated. I think part of that is because we kind of built this piece by piece organically. We didn't have a grand plan. We send people out for Greenbelt training externally, and that's a kind of a benchmark, but everything else below that we run internally ourselves. And what I tend to do is I use sharing networks, etc., to sort of benchmark the kind of what we're hitting. In terms of output, at the moment, a lot of our focus is on small improvements. We've kind of put larger ones on hold because our entire processes are changing around us. If you like, there's global programs coming in and changing everything. So we're not putting effort into large projects. No particular software. We have trackers that we use at various levels of granularity, depending on the size of the project. And we will clearly, for the bigger ones, you'll have robust metrics, performance metrics, benefits realization, all that kind of thing. It's not probably as detailed as a lot of companies who would do a lot of very big projects do, simply because a lot of our activities are on a quite small level. We will make sure people demonstrate some benefits, but we don't put a huge emphasis for the small improvements on chapter and verse benefits.
Sure.
Often that can take longer than the improvement.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Okay. I just want to come back maybe to the poll we looked at there on people's focus, and I don't know if we can put up the result of, are people more focused on tools or on people? So, okay, so 2/3 to 1/3 is laying towards that. What do you think of that?
I'm really encouraged.
Yeah.
I'm really encouraged. Ciaran and I were chatting the other day, and I was a tools person by heart. So I'm a scientist and I'm a logical, analytical person, and I trained in Six Sigma first before I came near Lean, you know. And the tools stuff makes sense. It's very logical. Of course, it's nice, but you have to get past it. It only gets you so far. And at the end of the day, this does come down to the people. And that was a huge personal conversion. And you have to start to dig into what motivates and what drives people. Logic will drive some, but it doesn't drive at least half your workforce. So you've got to get behind what's driving them. And then you start to tackle it. And I see a lot of leaders who are still stuck in the logical flow.
Sure. Yes. Yeah.
And you won't get past it. So I'm quite encouraged to see that it's like a 60%.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's great to see. And I think, as you said, we spoke about this, and I think a similar journey, you know, again, I'm a science background, you know, it is attractive to go for the tools and that way of thinking. But I think what's really interesting to hear is that development, and I think most people are sharing this, that the tools are there to support, they're there to help you identify opportunities, but engaging people, building culture. And I'd love to hear at the end just that piece around job design. So it's going the whole next level, saying, okay, let's really think about what's motivating people here, what makes them enthusiastic about their jobs, and how can we get them more and more involved and autonomous in their roles. So I think that's really would love to hear more about that, and maybe in a separate session. I think we
finish the masters first. I don't really understand job design. Give me another year.
Absolutely, we'll come back to you after your thesis. And it's just probably we've time for one more, and just to close off the discussion. In terms of ongoing measurement, do you do an annual audit? Do you have a sort of a check-in to see how you're doing, or is there anything around that you might want to share?
We don't, and we probably should. We don't. It's funny. We kind of check that the results, our business results, are heading in the right direction, and that's a rigorous thing on a daily, weekly, monthly, annual basis. We understand why they're moving the directions. We don't really formally audit the program, or the approach, really, if you like, every year. We probably should. Haven't felt the need to up until now. Sure. We know we have gaps. But no, we haven't, and probably should add that to my to-do list, maybe.
So I think, just conscious of time, we want to try and give people back a bit of time for lunch. I just want to say thank you so much, Nuala. Every time I always take something away from any presentation you give. Really insightful. I think it's been a fantastic discussion. We could stay for ages. There's lots more questions, and apologies I didn't get to everyone's question, but we could talk for hours on this. But I just want to remind people that this recording will be on Lean Business Ireland webpage in the next few days. So go back and talk to your senior leaders and tell them about this fantastic network and this fantastic knowledge sharing opportunities that you're going to have over the year. Keep an eye on the website for events, for more presentations and other webinars that will happen across the different regional networks. It's open to everyone, and get involved, and we'll be speaking to you over the year. So again, just to close, thank you again, Nuala. Thank you for your time. Thank you for everyone for dialing in. I hope you got something out of it, and we'll talk soon. Okay.
Thank you very much, guys.
Take care.
Take
Bye-bye.
care.
Thank you.